My name is Vivian Ashford. I'm 48 years old, and for the last 12 years, I have built a career doing one thing exceptionally well: protecting powerful people from the consequences of their own carelessness. I'm a corporate attorney, international mergers, acquisitions, asset protection, cross-border restructures. I help companies move billions quietly, legally, and efficiently across jurisdictions before anyone on the outside fully understands what happened. I know how to read risk. I know how to recognize hidden intent behind polished language. I know when someone is laying the groundwork to leave before they ever say the word goodbye. What I didn't know, or maybe what I refused to admit, was that I had become the one person in my own life who was least protected. I was married to Nathan Cole for 14 years. When I met him, he was handsome in a disarmed, lived-in sort of way. Not flashy, not loud, the kind of man who could make steadiness look like character. He had a 5-year-old son, Evan, from a previous relationship with his ex-girlfriend, Lila Mercer. Lila had walked away when Evan was 2. There was always some vague explanation attached to her absence. She needed space. She was overwhelmed. She was rebuilding her life. The words changed depending on who was telling the story, but the result stayed the same. A little boy kept getting left behind. I stepped in without making a speech about it. I drove him to school, sat through parent-teacher nights, paid for tutoring, sports camps, recruiting showcases, and every expensive little edge the world likes to call opportunity, when it's really just money wearing a better suit. I edited his scholarship essays at midnight. I taught him how to shake hands properly, how to write a thank you email, how to lose without sulking. I learned his moods, his silences, and the exact tone in his voice that meant he wanted comfort but was too proud to ask for it. I wasn't his biological mother. I was the one who stayed long enough to become a structure in his life. I also had 2 daughters from my first marriage. Claire, 20, was finishing her junior year at Georgetown Law. Sharp, self-contained, dangerously perceptive. She had inherited my habit of going quiet when everyone else in the room was hoping for emotion. Maya, 16, still lived at home, quiet and observant in a softer way. She noticed tension the way some people notice weather pressure before rain. Her father had died when the girls were young. Cancer. Fast. Indecent in its efficiency. After that, I became a woman who functioned beautifully under pressure. I wore grief the way I wore tailored suits. Clean lines, controlled presentation, no wasted movement. Nathan used to say that was one of the things he loved about me, that I made people feel safe, that I had a way of taking chaos and giving it walls, a roof, and a calendar invite. At the time, I thought he meant it as admiration. Now I think what he really admired was convenience. The warning signs had been there for months. Scattered, small, almost insultingly ordinary. Nathan started working with a business development coach named Vanessa Price. His consulting work had plateaued, and suddenly everything required strategy sessions, client development dinners, and positioning conversations that somehow only happened at night. Vanessa, according to him, was brilliant, connected, transformational. A woman who understood how real growth worked. Apparently, real growth required boutique hotels, private dining rooms, and cologne he'd never worn in 14 years of marriage. He bought new shirts, changed his haircut, started checking his reflection in dark windows. He also started talking differently. Not dramatically, just enough for me to notice. Certain words came out with a cleaner edge, a more deliberate rhythm, as though he were borrowing someone else's confidence and hoping it fit. I noticed everything. I simply said nothing. That's what people misunderstand about women like me. Silence does not mean confusion. Silence does not mean passivity. Sometimes silence is just intelligence declining to announce itself too early. I began to keep records. Quietly. A forwarded invoice for a hotel bar in Aspen on a week he told me he was local. A restaurant charge for 2 on a night he claimed he'd eaten alone between meetings. Calendar blocks labeled growth review that corresponded to nothing on his business accounts. A receipt for a perfume gift that never came into this house. None of it was enough by itself. Together it formed a pattern, and patterns are where truth lives. Still I waited, not because I was afraid, because timing matters more than outrage. December 23rd was when the truth stopped circling and finally landed. We were having dinner at home, just the 4 of us. Claire was back from Georgetown for the holidays and helping set the table. Maya had made her garlic bread. the kind that fills the entire downstairs with butter, roasted garlic, and warmth before anyone even sits down. Evan was at the table scrolling through his phone, taller than Nathan now, all broad shoulders and distracted teenage confidence. He had scholarship offers from multiple Division I programs, and lately he wore that success like a second skin. Nathan walked in with his phone still in his hand. He was smiling, not warmly, not nervously. It was the smile of someone who had rehearsed a line and was already committed to delivering it. Evan is spending Christmas with his real mother, he announced, setting down a fork with careful precision. Lila reached out. They've been talking. The room went silent, not the soft silence of a family dinner settling into itself, the kind that arrives right before something irreversible. I looked up slowly. Excuse me? Nathan didn't answer right away. He glanced at Evan instead, as if looking for reinforcement. Lila wants time with him. She's trying to reconnect. He deserves that. His real mother. The phrase landed with a force I felt physically. I turned to Evan. Is that what you want? He still didn't look at me. I mean, yeah, I should probably get to know her, right? Probably. Right. I stared at him and, for one awful second, saw the child he used to be, layered over the boy sitting there now. The little boy who used to fall asleep in the car after practice. The little boy who once cried because another student called him a burden and asked me in a whisper if kids could tell when somebody's mom didn't want them. That child was gone from his face in an instant. Nathan stepped in before I could say anything else. We leave tomorrow morning. She rented a cabin in Colorado. We? I asked. That finally made him look at me. Yes, he said. I'm going with him. It's a delicate reunion. Claire set down the plate in her hand a little too hard. You made this decision without talking to Mom? Nathan sighed like she was being difficult. This isn't about your mother. No, it was exactly about me. It was about taking 14 years of labor, loyalty, emotional investment, and practical motherhood and reducing it to a placeholder role in a sentence so casual it barely qualified as cruelty. Maya was the first one to move. She pushed back from the table, not violently, just enough for the chair legs to scrape the floor with a dry, ugly sound. I'm not hungry, she said quietly. Then she walked upstairs. A few seconds later, I heard her bedroom door close. Not slammed, just shut, which somehow hurt more. I turned back to Nathan. We're going to discuss this privately. He laughed. It was sharp and dismissive, and it told me more about the last year of my marriage than any private investigator's report. There's nothing to discuss, Vivian, he said. He deserves his real family. Claire looked at him in total disbelief. Evan stared at the table. I could feel the temperature in the room changing inside my body, like all my warmth was pulling inward to protect something vital. And then Nathan did what arrogant people do when they think they already own the outcome. He added one more thing. Oh, and before I forget, he said, I accepted the Sydney transfer for you. Start date is February 1st. I genuinely thought I'd heard him wrong. My firm had been trying to relocate me to our Sydney office for 2 years. Senior partner track, international lead portfolio, massive salary bump, full relocation package. I had turned it down twice. For this family. For stability. For him. You did what? I asked. Nathan folded his arms. Calm. Certain. Infuriatingly sure of himself. You kept dragging your feet. I made the call, he said. It's the best opportunity you're ever going to get. And honestly, you were never going to take it unless someone decided for you. I felt Claire go still. Even Evan looked up at that. You accepted a life-changing international transfer, I said, each word precise. On my behalf, without asking me. He shrugged. Actually shrugged. If you don't like it, he said, then maybe we should stop pretending this marriage is fine. Take the transfer, or divorce me. But I'm done organizing my life around your indecision. There are moments when anger comes hot and wild, and there are moments when it arrives so cold it becomes clarity. That was what happened to me. I didn't scream. I didn't throw anything. I didn't ask him to repeat himself so the room could fully appreciate what he'd just done. I simply stood. I folded my napkin beside my untouched plate and said very calmly, enjoy your dinner. Then I walked to my study and closed the door behind me. The silence on the other side of that door felt different. Cleaner, like a courtroom after everyone has finally stopped lying. I crossed to my desk and opened the lower drawer. Inside was a folder I had started 6 months earlier, back when intuition first became evidence. Emails, screenshots, timeline notes, receipts, investigator summaries, copies of older legal documents Nathan had signed, without reading carefully enough. Everything tabbed, dated, ordered. I opened my laptop, then the second one, then my secure phone line. Luxembourg was already awake. My estate planning attorney answered on the second ring. Vivian, he said, it's been a while. I looked at the family photo on my desk. Nathan smiling, Evan in his football uniform, Claire and Maya on either side of me, all of us arranged in the neat geometry of a life that, from the outside, still looked enviable. I need to activate the contingency protocols, I said. There was a pause. Then his voice dropped lower. All of them? I leaned back in my chair and listened to the faint movement of dishes in the kitchen downstairs, to the family still sitting in the wreckage without realizing the structure had already shifted beneath them. Yes, I said. All of them. The house was still awake when I ended the call. I sat there for a moment after the line went silent, my hand resting lightly on the desk, the way I sometimes paused in court before delivering the sentence that would end a negotiation. Downstairs, dishes clinked. Someone turned on the faucet. Life continuing, unaware the legal foundation beneath it had just shifted. I opened the folder again. 6 months of observation sat neatly organized in front of me. Receipts, screenshots, a timeline built the way I build cases, quietly, patiently, allowing other people's carelessness to assemble the truth for me. My attorney called back 9 minutes later. "Vivian," he said, voice sharper now, fully awake. "I've reviewed the file you referenced last summer. Are you certain you want to activate the trust restructure?" "Yes. That means the Hartwell," he corrected himself quickly. "The Ashford Family Trust will become the sole holding entity for the house and investment accounts." "That was always the intention," I said. "Your husband signed the postnuptial confirmation in 2016, he continued carefully. "If we proceed, he will have no claim to those assets." I glanced again at the photograph on my desk. Nathan had signed that document with barely a glance at the time. He thought it was estate planning for my daughters. In a way, it was. "Proceed," I said. He exhaled once. "Very well, I'll contact Luxembourg." I hung up and immediately dialed the second number. 3 time zones away, my trust counsel answered. "Good morning, Vivian. Activate the contingency structure." A brief pause. "You understand that once initiated, the asset reclassification becomes extremely difficult to reverse." "I understand perfectly." "Very well," he said. "We'll begin immediately." I closed the laptop. For the first time that night, I allowed myself to sit still. Not angry. Not sad. Just clear. A soft knock sounded on the door. "Come in," I said. The door opened just enough for Maya to slip inside. She was still in her pajamas, phone in hand, long dark hair falling over one shoulder. Her eyes studied my face with the careful seriousness she had inherited from me. "Dad really accepted the Sydney transfer for you?" she asked. "He did." "That's messed up." I almost smiled. "Yes," I said quietly, "it is." She stepped fully into the room and closed the door behind her. "What are you going to do?" The question wasn't emotional, it was practical. Maya had always understood that decisions were rarely about what you felt. They were about what you did next. "I'm going to accept the position," I said. Her eyebrows lifted slightly. "You are?" "Yes." "For real?" "Yes." She leaned against the bookshelf thinking. "What about us?" "You're staying with Claire for a while." Her expression tightened. "Why can't I stay here?" I folded my hands on the desk. "Because this house is about to become legally complicated," I said, "and I want you somewhere peaceful while that happens." She studied me for a long moment. Then she nodded slowly. "Okay." Another pause. "Mom," she stopped herself and corrected softly. "Nathan deserves whatever you're about to do, doesn't he?" I looked at her. Maya had always understood more than she said. "Yes," I answered. "He does." She nodded once more, satisfied with the honesty. Then she turned and left the room quietly. I heard her footsteps disappear upstairs. I didn't return to the kitchen. Instead, I opened the final document folder on my computer and began sending instructions. By midnight, the process had already started. By 3 a.m., Luxembourg confirmed the transfer queue. By 4 a.m., the first legal domino fell. They left before sunrise. I heard the front door close, heard the car start. But I didn't go to the window. There was nothing left to watch. I was already on my 3rd cup of coffee, sitting at the desk with 3 screens glowing in the dark. At 6:12 a.m., Luxembourg called. "The trust restructure is complete," my attorney said. His voice was calm, precise. "All assets previously held jointly have been reclassified under the Ashford Family Trust." "Good." "The residential property has been transferred to its holding entity. Deed ownership now lists Ashford Holdings, LLC as the sole owner." "Excellent." "Your husband's name does not appear on any of the documentation." I took a sip of coffee. "What about the vehicles?" "The Range Rover is leased under your corporate account. The leasing company has been notified not to renew the secondary driver authorization." "And the checking accounts?" "Closed and transferred to the trust operating account." He hesitated. "Vivian, I have to ask, are you absolutely certain you want to proceed this aggressively?" Yes. Very well. The line clicked off. I leaned back and looked around the study. The house felt strangely quiet. Not sad, just empty in a way that suggested something inevitable had finally finished happening. Tuesday morning, I boarded a flight to Sydney. 13 hours. Business class. Noise-canceling headphones. 3 encrypted calls with lawyers across 3 continents. The legal equivalent of dismantling a bridge while someone was still driving across it. When the plane landed, the air felt different. Salt from the harbor. Warm sunlight. The sort of horizon that reminds you the world is much bigger than whatever drama you just left behind. Harrison Cole, managing partner of the firm's Australian office, met me at the airport. He shook my hand firmly. I have to admit, he said as we walked toward the car, when Nathan called last week saying you'd accepted the transfer, I thought he was joking. I slid my sunglasses on. I've changed my mind. You turned this position down twice. I know. What happened? I looked out the window as the city moved past us. Priorities, I said. He didn't ask anything else. The contracts were waiting for me when we reached the office. Promotion documents, relocation agreements, corporate housing, vehicle allowance, signing bonus paperwork. I read every line. Then I made changes. Corporate housing registered solely in my name, I said. Harrison nodded. Vehicle lease direct to me, not household registration. Done. And the signing bonus transferred to an account I'll specify. He raised an eyebrow. That's unusual. I signed the final page. I'm in an unusual situation. That evening I video called Claire. She was sitting cross-legged on the couch in her Georgetown apartment with Maya beside her, both of them holding takeout containers. How's your sister? I asked. Annoyingly calm, Claire said. We ordered Thai food and watched terrible reality TV. Maya waved at the screen. Hi, Mom. Hi, sweetheart. Claire studied me carefully. What exactly are you doing? You remember the post-nuptial agreement Nathan signed in 2016? I asked. Her eyes widened immediately. You're invoking the premarital capital clause. Yes. Does he know? Not yet. Claire leaned back slowly. Wow. Another pause. Then she smiled slightly. Well, he's about to. 3 days later, he did. On December 28th, at 3:47 p.m., Mountain Time, Nathan received the phone call that collapsed the illusion he'd been living inside. I know the exact time because my attorney forwarded the call log. 10 minutes later, my phone buzzed. Claire, she sounded breathless. Mom, Maya recorded it. Recorded what? Nathan's phone call with his lawyer. A second later, the audio file arrived. I sat in the quiet hotel room in Sydney and pressed play. Nathan's voice came first. Relaxed. Completely unaware. Hello? Then another voice. Professional. Tight. Nathan, this is Richard Polson, your attorney. Hey, Richard, Nathan said casually. What's going on? A pause. Then Richard asked the question that finally cracked the world Nathan thought he controlled. What exactly did you let Vivian do? Nathan laughed lightly. What are you talking about? There was a long silence. And then Richard said slowly, Nathan, your house, the investment accounts, the vehicles, they're no longer in your name. The silence that followed lasted nearly 10 seconds. When Nathan finally spoke again, his voice was no longer confident. What do you mean they're not in my name? I sat there in Sydney, looking out over the harbor skyline as the truth finally reached him across an ocean. And for the first time in months, I felt absolutely nothing. The silence on the recording stretched long enough that even the background noise on Nathan's end seemed to fade. I imagined exactly where he was, probably sitting in some lodge dining room in Colorado, pretending to enjoy a family reunion that had been carefully staged to erase 14 years of history. Lila smiling across the table, Evan somewhere nearby, trying not to look uncomfortable, Nathan thinking he was the one in control of how the future would unfold. Then Richard's voice came through again. Nathan, I'm going to need you to listen very carefully. What are you talking about? Nathan said. His voice was sharper now, irritation bleeding through the confusion. The house is in both our names. It was, Richard replied. Another pause. You signed refinancing documents in 2019, the lawyer continued, along with a trust transfer authorization. I remember refinancing, Nathan said impatiently. That was just restructuring the mortgage. No, Richard said quietly. It wasn't. I leaned back in the chair of the Sydney hotel room, watching the harbor outside my window while the truth finished assembling itself on the other side of the planet. The property is currently held by the Ashford Family Trust, Richard continued. You are not listed as a beneficiary. Nathan laughed. Not real laughter. The brittle kind people use when they assume a misunderstanding is about to correct itself. That's ridiculous. I'm looking at the deed, Richard replied. It transferred ownership 3 days ago to Ashford Holdings, LLC, which is controlled by the trust. That's impossible. It's legal. Silence again. I could almost hear the moment the memory returned to him. The day in 2016 when I asked him to sign the postnuptial agreement. He had been distracted that day, if I remembered correctly. Evan had a tournament. Nathan skimmed the first page and waved the rest away with a confident smile. You and your legal paperwork, he had joked. I remember answering calmly. I prefer things to be clear. He signed without reading the clauses. Now those clauses were speaking for themselves. Richard continued. The postnuptial agreement you signed waived any claim to property purchased with Vivian's premarital assets or trust distributions. Nathan's voice dropped. That's just estate planning. No, Richard said. It's asset protection. Another long silence. Okay, Nathan said slowly. Even if that's true, the bank accounts are still joint. No. The word landed like a hammer. The accounts were closed and transferred into the trust operating structure 3 days ago, Richard explained. Legally. With documentation you previously signed authorizing those transfers. Nathan exhaled sharply. What about the cars? The Range Rover is leased under her corporate account. That's still our household vehicle. Not anymore. I watched a ferry move slowly across the harbor. Nathan's voice finally cracked. Richard, what exactly does this mean? It means, Richard said carefully, that the house, the investments, the vehicles, and the operating accounts are no longer marital assets. Another silence, longer this time. Then Nathan asked the question every arrogant man eventually asks when he realizes the rules were never written for his benefit. Can you fix it? Richard didn't answer right away. When he did, his voice was calm. No. The word hung in the air. Everything appears to be fully documented and legally compliant, the lawyer continued. Frankly, Nathan, it's airtight. The recording ended there. I sat in the quiet hotel room, phone resting in my hand. Outside the window, the Sydney Opera House gleamed white against the afternoon sun. For months, I had imagined this moment, not with satisfaction, just curiosity. How would it feel when the truth finally arrived? The answer, it turned out, was simple. It felt quiet. Nathan came home on January 2nd. I was already back from Sydney. Jet lag had left me awake before sunrise, so I was sitting in my study reviewing emails when I heard the front door open. His key still worked, for now. Footsteps crossed the foyer. The house was quiet, without the girls there. Claire had taken Maya back to Georgetown after the awards ceremony rehearsals started. The emptiness made every sound echo. Nathan appeared in the doorway of the study. He looked different. Not physically exactly, just smaller somehow. His eyes moved around the room, taking in the open laptop, the organized stacks of documents, the quiet calm of someone who had been waiting. We need to talk, he said. I gestured to the chair across from my desk. Sit. He did, slowly. His gaze flicked toward the hallway. Where are the girls? Claire's apartment in Georgetown. You sent them away? I gave them somewhere peaceful to stay. He rubbed his face with both hands. Vivian, Richard called. I know. He said you moved everything. I didn't move anything, I said calmly. I reclaimed what was already mine. Nathan leaned forward. You can't just lock me out of everything we built together. I opened the desk drawer and slid a thick folder across the desk toward him. Let's talk about what we built. He looked at the tabs. Property, trust structure, vehicle leases, investment statements. Go ahead, I said. Nathan opened the first section. The house deed. The house was purchased in 2011, I said, using funds from my grandmother's trust. He flipped to the next document. The mortgage was paid off in 2019 using dividends from premarital investments. Another page. The Range Rover is a corporate lease under my firm's name. Another. Your consulting business generated $12,000 total over 14 years. He stared at the numbers, like they belonged to someone else's life. You signed the postnuptial agreement in 2016, I continued quietly. You waived rights to property purchased with premarital assets. Nathan closed the folder slowly. What do you want from me? The question came out smaller than I'd ever heard his voice. Nothing, I said. He blinked. I want you to leave. The words settled between us. You have 10 days to remove your personal belongings, I continued. After that, anything remaining will be donated. His mouth opened. Closed. You're being cruel. I met his eyes evenly. No, I said. I'm being finished. Nathan sat there for a long time. Finally, he stood. You're going to regret this. I didn't answer, because we both knew something he hadn't accepted yet. The only person who regretted anything in this room was him. 2 days later, my phone rang. The caller ID said Evan. I answered. Hey, he said quietly. Hello, Evan. My scholarship got canceled. I closed my eyes briefly. What happened? The coach said my paperwork isn't valid anymore. I knew exactly why. For 12 years, I had signed his legal guardianship documents. Scholarship forms, financial aid paperwork, FAFSA declarations listing him as my dependent. 3 days earlier, I had terminated that guardianship. He was 18 years and 3 months old, legally an adult, legally no longer my responsibility. My father won't sign the forms, Evan said. His voice was tight with panic now. What am I supposed to do? The same thing millions of other students do, I said quietly. Take out loans, work, figure it out. There was a long silence. You're really doing this? You made a choice, I said. Then I ended the call. 10 minutes later, my phone rang again. Maya. He's crying, she said softly. I know. There was a pause. I'm proud of you, she said. For the first time since Christmas dinner, I smiled. The house felt different once Nathan understood he wasn't coming back to the life he thought he owned. For years, that house had carried the quiet rhythm of routine. Morning coffee, late-night homework at the kitchen island, Maya's music drifting down the hallway, Evan stomping upstairs after football practice, Nathan pacing the living room during conference calls. Now every sound echoed. Nathan stayed in the guest room during the 10 days I gave him. We barely spoke. When we did, it was logistical. What boxes can I take? Anything that's yours. What about the furniture in the den? That was purchased through my firm's account. Every answer was factual, documented, emotionless. At first, Nathan tried anger. You're doing this to punish me. I didn't respond. Then he tried bargaining. We can fix this. I didn't respond to that either, because there was nothing left to fix. 3 days into the 10-day deadline, the house filled briefly with noise again. Nathan's lawyer, Richard Paulson, arrived with a folder under his arm. Richard was the kind of attorney who had spent his career cleaning up other people's messes. Calm voice, expensive suit, permanent expression of mild disappointment. He sat across from me at the dining table. Nathan stood behind him like a man who had already lost the argument, but hoped volume might still change the outcome. Richard opened the folder. Vivian, he began carefully, Nathan asked me to review the situation. I assumed as much. You've executed a very thorough asset restructuring. Thank you. Nathan exhaled sharply behind him. That's not a compliment, he muttered. Richard ignored him. The postnuptial agreement does limit Nathan's claim to the house and investment accounts, he said. Yes. However, Richard continued, there may be room for negotiation if both parties are willing to compromise. I folded my hands. What compromise did Nathan offer when he accepted my international relocation without asking me? Richard glanced back at Nathan. Nathan said nothing. Richard tried again. Perhaps a temporary financial arrangement while the divorce proceedings. There will be no temporary arrangements, I said. The sentence was calm. Final. Nathan slammed his hand on the table. This is insane, Vivian. Richard closed his eyes briefly. Nathan, he said quietly, please. But Nathan wasn't finished. I spent 14 years in this house, he continued. 14 years building this family. I looked at him. You spent 14 years living inside something I built. The room fell silent. Richard cleared his throat. In that case, he said carefully, I believe we'll proceed through the formal divorce process. That would be appropriate. Nathan stared at me like he was seeing a stranger. In truth, he was. The call from Evan came 2 days later. His voice sounded older somehow, less confident. I'm working now, he said. Where? A sporting goods store near campus. That's good. He hesitated. I applied to community college. That's also good. Another silence. I thought you'd fix things, he admitted quietly. I didn't answer immediately. For 12 years, I had fixed everything. That had been the problem. I fixed things when you were a child, I said. Now you're an adult. You're really done being my mom. The words hurt more than I expected, but I kept my voice steady. I was never trying to replace your mother, Evan. Then why did you do everything? Because someone had to. But I didn't say that. Instead, I said the truth he needed now. Because I loved you. He didn't answer for a few seconds. Then he said quietly, I think I understand that now. The line went silent. On January 10th, I flew back from Sydney again. Not for Nathan, for Maya. Her high school was holding its winter awards ceremony that evening, and she had asked only one thing from me in the middle of everything that had happened. Please be there. I arrived 2 hours early. The auditorium smelled like polished wood and winter coats. Parents filled the seats slowly, murmuring to each other about grades, college plans, and scholarships. Then I saw Nathan. He stood near the back of the room. He looked thinner. His suit hung slightly loose around his shoulders. For a moment, we just looked at each other across the crowd. Then Maya's name was called. She walked onto the stage calmly, shoulders straight, the same quiet composure she always carried. Principal's Excellence Award, the headmaster announced. The applause filled the auditorium. Maya stepped to the microphone. Her voice was steady. I want to thank my teachers, she said, and my sister Claire, who helped me with my college applications. Another wave of applause. Then she paused. And my mom. She looked directly at me. for teaching me that respecting yourself sometimes means making difficult decisions. The room grew quiet. Maya continued. She showed me that standing up for yourself doesn't mean you hate anyone. It just means you understand your own worth. The applause that followed was louder than before. I saw Nathan standing perfectly still near the back wall, white-faced, as if the entire room had just delivered a verdict. After the ceremony, he approached me in the hallway. Vivian, he said. Yes? Evan lost his scholarship. I know. Can you help him? The words came out quickly, almost desperate. I shook my head. I terminated the legal guardianship. That's not fair. No, I said quietly. It's not convenient. Nathan rubbed his face again. We could still go to counseling. No. Vivian. This wasn't one mistake, I said. It was a pattern. He fell silent. You made decisions about my career without asking me, I continued. You told my stepson I wasn't his real family. You replaced our marriage with someone else's influence. Nathan looked down at the floor. I didn't realize. That's the problem, I said. He reached for my hand. I stepped back. The divorce papers will be filed next week, I said. He nodded slowly. For the first time since Christmas dinner, he didn't argue. The divorce hearing was scheduled for February 14th, Valentine's Day. I almost laughed when my attorney mentioned the date. Some symbolism writes itself, but that part of the story hadn't happened yet. The divorce hearing was scheduled for February 14th, Valentine's Day. The irony wasn't lost on anyone. My attorney called it coincidence. Claire called it poetic justice. Maya simply rolled her eyes and said the universe sometimes had a dark sense of humor. Personally, I felt nothing about the date at all. By the time February arrived, the marriage had already ended. The court was just the formality that closed the file. The conference room downtown smelled faintly of polished wood and printer toner. Large mahogany table, neutral carpet, frosted glass walls that turned every silhouette outside into a ghost moving past the room. Nathan sat across from me. For 14 years, I had watched him get ready in the morning. Tie knots, cufflinks, the quiet routine of a man who believed his life was stable. Now he looked like someone who had been running uphill for weeks. Thinner, palms resting flat on the table, eyes tired in a way that suggested sleep hadn't come easily lately. His attorney, Richard Paulson, sat beside him with a folder already open. My attorney sat next to me. The documents were laid out neatly between us. Everything organized. Everything final. The judge entered. Formalities were exchanged. Then the process began. Richard spoke first. Your Honor, my client requests consideration for spousal support. My attorney slid a document forward immediately. The post-nuptial agreement signed in 2016 waives that claim, she said. The judge scanned the paperwork. Claim denied. Nathan's shoulders sank slightly. Richard tried again. Then we request evaluation of marital assets accumulated during the 14-year marriage. Another document. Another quiet explanation. The primary property is held in the Ashford Family Trust, funded with premarital assets. The judge nodded. Claim denied. Richard adjusted his glasses. What about the vehicles and financial accounts? The vehicles are corporate leases under Ms. Ashford's firm. Claim denied. Every request met the same answer. Denied. 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 It wasn't dramatic. No raised voices. No courtroom theatrics. Just quiet legal reality unfolding exactly the way the documents dictated. Nathan didn't interrupt. He didn't argue. He simply sat there listening as the life he once assumed was shared was carefully described as something that had never legally belonged to him at all. Finally, the judge closed the file. The marriage is hereby dissolved. The words were almost gentle. Just like that. 14 years ended. We stepped out into the hallway afterward. Nathan stopped walking. Vivian. I turned. He looked smaller in the courthouse light. Not angry anymore. Just tired. You planned all this. The accusation wasn't loud. Just heavy. I considered the question for a moment. Then I answered honestly. I protected myself from exactly the situation you created. His jaw tightened. I didn't think you'd go this far. You didn't think I would leave. That was the truth. Nathan had believed the structure of our life was permanent. That I would always absorb the shock of his decisions. That the family I built would remain available no matter how carelessly he treated it. He ran a hand through his hair. You really feel nothing about this? I thought about that carefully. Then I shook my head. I feel relieved. The word surprised even me. But it was accurate. Not joy. Not revenge. Just relief. Relief from carrying something that had quietly become too heavy. Nathan looked down. Evan's struggling, he said. I know. He's working 2 jobs and taking classes at community college. That's how many people build their lives. Nathan nodded slowly. I didn't realize how much you handled. I didn't answer, because that realization had come far too late. The months after the divorce felt strangely quiet. The kind of quiet that arrives after a storm when you finally realize the wind has stopped. Claire visited Sydney in March. She stood in my new office on the 43rd floor, staring out the massive windows at the harbor. The opera house gleamed in the afternoon sun. "Okay," she said finally. "This view is ridiculous." I laughed. "You're welcome to move here after graduation." She smiled. "I might." Maya started at an international school 2 weeks later. She adjusted faster than I expected. New friends, new routines, new city. One evening, she sat across from me at the kitchen counter while we ate dinner. "You seem lighter," she said. "Do I?" "Yeah." She thought for a moment, like you stopped carrying something. She wasn't wrong. One afternoon in April, my phone buzzed. "Evan." I stared at the screen for a long moment before answering. "Hi." "Hi, Vivian." He hesitated. "I got into community college." "That's good." "I'm studying business management." "That's a solid choice." Another silence. "I'm also working at the sporting goods store still." "Hard work builds discipline." I think I'm starting to understand that. His voice sounded different. Less entitled. More grounded. "I'm not calling to ask for anything," he said quickly. "I just wanted you to know I'm trying." I stood by the window of my Sydney office, looking out across the harbor. "I know you are," I said. There was a pause. "Thank you for everything you did for me growing up." That one landed deeper than anything else. "You're welcome, Evan." He exhaled softly. "I hope someday we can talk more." "Maybe," I said. Not forgiveness. Not rejection. Just honesty. 3 weeks later, Claire called me. "Have you heard about Nathan?" "No." "He filed for bankruptcy." I closed my eyes briefly. Not out of satisfaction. Just acceptance. Nathan had built his life around assumptions. Assumptions that someone else would always hold things together. Now he was learning what independence actually required. Claire's voice softened. "Do you feel bad?" I thought about that carefully. Then I answered, "No," because what I felt was something else entirely. Peace. But the story wasn't quite finished yet. Sydney changed the rhythm of my life in ways I hadn't expected. The city wakes early. Sunlight hits the harbor in a pale gold wash that makes the water look almost unreal, like someone polished the entire horizon overnight. Ferries move across the bay in slow white arcs. The opera house catches the light differently every hour. From the 43rd floor of my office, the view never quite looks the same twice. For the first few weeks, I worked longer hours than necessary. Not because the firm demanded it, because rebuilding a life leaves strange, empty spaces in the day. Work fills those spaces neatly. New clients, new teams, new negotiations that required the same calm focus I'd always relied on. But there was something different about the woman sitting behind that desk now. I wasn't holding my breath anymore. Maya adapted faster than I did. The international school she enrolled in sat near the harbor, a modern glass building filled with students from half the countries on the planet. Within 2 weeks, she had a small group of friends and a calendar full of study sessions, volleyball practices, and weekend trips exploring the city. One evening, she came home carrying a stack of textbooks and dropped them on the kitchen counter. "You know what's weird?" she said. "What?" "No one here knows anything about our old life." I poured 2 glasses of water. "That must feel strange." She thought about it. "Actually, it feels nice." She leaned back against the counter. "Back home, everyone knew our family story. Here, I just get to be me." That sentence stayed with me longer than she probably realized. Because she was right. For the first time in years, we were no longer defined by the structure of a marriage that had quietly stopped working long before it officially ended. Claire visited again in early summer. She arrived jet-lagged, loud, and immediately critical of the tiny espresso machine in my kitchen. "You live in Australia now," she said. "This coffee situation is unacceptable." 2 hours later, she had somehow found a cafe down the street and returned carrying 3 cups and a pastry box. We sat on the balcony overlooking the harbor. Claire studied me carefully. "You're different." "How?" "You're not tense." I laughed softly. "Is that really how I used to look?" "Yes," she said bluntly. "You look like someone constantly waiting for the next problem." She took another sip of coffee. "Now you look like someone who solved it." Maybe she was right. Late one evening in July, my phone buzzed again. "Evan." It had been almost 3 months since our last conversation. I answered. "Hello?" "Hi, Vivian." His voice sounded steadier now. "I finished my first semester." "That's good." "I got mostly A's." "That's very good." He hesitated before continuing. "I also got promoted at the store, assistant manager." "That's impressive." There was a pause. "I wanted to tell you something," he said quietly. "Go ahead." "I used to think everything in my life just happened because it was supposed to. Scholarships, opportunities, the house we lived in. I thought that was normal." I leaned against the railing of the balcony. "And now? Now I realized someone was making those things possible." The honesty in his voice surprised me. "I'm not asking you to forgive anything," he added quickly. "I just wanted you to know I understand it now." The harbor lights flickered across the water below. "Understanding matters," I said. He exhaled slowly. "Thank you for raising me." That sentence settled somewhere deep in my chest. "You're welcome, Evan." We ended the call a few minutes later. No dramatic reconciliation. Just a quiet acknowledgement that people sometimes grow only after they lose the structure that once held them up. I heard about Nathan through Claire occasionally. He was still rebuilding his life. Consulting work had slowed. The bankruptcy forced him to start over in ways he'd never imagined. The expensive habits disappeared first, then the confidence that had always rested on financial stability. Claire asked me once if I felt responsible. I shook my head. No, because responsibility implies control. Nathan had made his own decisions. He had chosen to treat respect like something optional. And choices always have consequences. One afternoon, months later, I stood alone in my office, looking out across the harbor again. The opera house glowed white in the afternoon sun. Ferries moved slowly across the water. Behind me, the quiet hum of the office continued. Assistants talking softly, keyboards tapping, the ordinary sound of work. For a moment, I thought about the woman I had been the previous Christmas. A woman sitting at a dinner table while her husband casually told her she wasn't really part of the family she had built. A woman who quietly stood up, walked into her study, and made one phone call that changed everything. That woman wasn't weak. She just needed one moment of clarity. And once she had it, everything else followed. I turned away from the window and picked up the next contract waiting on my desk. My life wasn't defined by what ended. It was defined by what I chose afterward. Some stories finish with reconciliation. Others finish with something quieter. Boundaries, self-respect, and the calm understanding that walking away from the wrong life is sometimes the first real step toward the right one.